The clock on my nightstand read 3:30 a.m. when I shot up in bed, gasping for air. The clothes I had been wearing, the sheets that had been covering me, and even the bed I had been laying on were all soaked through with sweat. The room smelled like fear mixed with the bitter twang of burning ozone. The smell assaulted my senses, and the sweat that had half dried around the edge of my eyelids began to sting my eyes brightly. This caused me a temporary inability to keep them open, which is just as well. I was too scared to look around the dark room for fear that it would still be there. Even now, a decade and a half later, it still comes for me. Not a single year passes that I don't get visited by this shadowy force that sits on my chest with an unimaginable weight, looks deep into my soul with bloodshot yellow eyes, and attempts to suck the air out of my lungs with disgusting, hate-filled breaths. I wiped my eyes and looked to my wife. It seemed she was still sound asleep. Her gentle snoring had let me know that all of the screaming and struggling I had been doing mere moments before had been an exclusively internal battle. This is something that I am often concerned about on nights like tonight. I do not want to wake her, or by extension worry her, so as long as my struggle does not cause her distress, then I suppose I can handle it on my own. I went to the kitchen to brew my morning coffee. It was hours yet before my day would normally start, but I knew sleep would not return to me, and at that point I did not want to spend another moment in the dark. Every time I close my eyes, I see the thing, its face burned by the uncounted ages that it had rotten in hell, its body mostly hidden by an oily cloak made of an impenetrable darkness that flowed around the thing's frame, with what seemed like a life of its own. The first time the figure assaulted me, I was 17. I had been getting ready for bed and talking to my girlfriend at the time on our webcams. I had left the room for a few minutes to use the restroom. When I returned, my girlfriend had said, "Hey, remind me to tell you something when I see you tomorrow." I asked what she meant, but of course she would not elaborate. As you can imagine, I was a tad unnerved. I would later learn she had seen an odd shadow moving around the room while I was gone. She didn't want to scare me though. For all she knew, it could have been a cat. Looking back, I don't even remember going to sleep that night. I only remember being startled awake at an unknown time later. The smell of fear thickened the room. Now, I know I keep saying that, but really what I mean is that the atmosphere of the room had become thick and oppressive, like pheromones telling my animal side that there was a predator nearby, watching me, just waiting. Adrenaline jumped into my system. I felt the cold panic spread. It started from my groin and traveled up my spine. My stomach knotted painfully. My hands and feet began to shake violently, but despite my fight or flight instincts telling me to get my shit in gear and fly the fuck out of there, I could not move. I was not scared into immobility. I was not frozen with irrational fear. I was paralyzed. I was being smothered. I was unable to even close my eyes despite wanting to do nothing more at that moment than to squeeze my eyes shut and to pray to whatever God was there for whatever forgiveness they offered. I even tried to scream for my mother. Imagine that, 17 years old, and screaming for my mommy. But at that moment, I had been more desperate than I had ever thought imaginable. I was trapped in my own body. I was forced to lay there watching the shadows cast by my computer screensaver flickering on the wall, flickering on the shadowy figure that now occupied the corner of my bedroom. It was tall. It was imposing, and no sooner had it noticed that I had noticed it than it was on my chest, crushing me. Up until this point, my breathing had been shallow, but now with this demonic shape putting its face mere inches from mine, I was unable to take in any air at all. I tried to struggle. I tried to scream. I began to feel woozy, and as my vision began to get hazy, the grim reality of the situation set in. I knew that, in that moment, if I lost consciousness, I would never again wake up. My vision became a pinprick surrounded by static. My lungs and throat burned with the lack of oxygen. My ears pounded with the sound of my rapid heartbeat. I had laid there for what felt like hours, but in reality could have only been minutes. Straining against the dead weight of my useless body and staring into the soulless eyes of my would-be killer. Before long, the warm embrace of sleep began to overtake me. With all hope of survival gone, I used what life I had left to give one final push for dear life. And, as suddenly as that had appeared, the thing was gone. I could breathe again. I was on my feet in an instant, slapping the light switch which had nearly blinded me with the sudden brightness of my surroundings. I didn't care. The clock on my desk read 3:30 a.m., and I sat with the lights on for the next several hours trying to come to terms with what happened. Much like I am doing now, staring into my coffee cup, oblivious to the tears streaming down my cheeks. I still feel it there, at the edge of my awareness, feeding off my fear, filling me with dread. It never leaves. It always returns.